So we got access to SGE, exciting times. And in this video, we're essentially going to break down 3 examples from SaaS, fintech, and e-commerce in that order. If you want to check out specific timestamps to jump to your vertical, you can see that in the description in your social network of choice. And stay tuned for a final kind of recap of some of the insights and first impressions of this tool at the end of the video. So let's get going. Why not start with just Googling this exactly? As you can see, we felt the initial prompt. Some queries are getting the prompt to click the button to see more. Some are not at all. It just depends on the query type. And you can see, at least on the desktop version, your eyes are drawn to the thumbnails, especially when they are engaging. It does feel like big blocks of bolder colors tend to draw the eye on average against these backgrounds. These color palettes do vary based on the query type from what we've seen. I think it's a little early to assume or base your strategy for thumbnail design against that, but it's something to keep an eye on. If you're in one vertical and they're showing a blue background, for example, you may want to consider your design without going off brand accordingly. So you can see it's actually a decent summary up top. It's essentially a quick answer, though. So it's interesting. They do a version of this, and essentially it's a short kind of recap that is what they used to do with more quick answers. And over time, quick answers started to actually go down in use. And they're still prominent. They still exist. They happen. But generally, as a SERP feature, they're a little less prominent than they used to be. For whatever reason, I'm not sure exactly why Google started to deprecate it. Potentially had something to do with people with other SERP features that draw more clicks for them. It's a little bit uncertain, but as of now, around 30% of searches have those kind of quick answer areas, or sorry, 7% have that quick answer area up top. If we kind of view Mozcast. Essentially what we're seeing here is that number, and you can see it's only continuing to drop from 8 to 1 to 7. So it's kind of interesting that with some external pressure, they're essentially reintroducing something that it seems like they had decided was no longer a good feature, because this is essentially what this is kind of like a, depending on your definition, a little high powered quick answer, essentially. So moving on to SaaS, let's do marketing automation software as a query. This is a common term for anyone in software. You're trying to rank for blank software or best software. You can see it's taking a little time to load on average. Again, eyes are drawn to the right a little bit, but on this specific result, we see a differentiated experience where maybe your eyes are drawn a little bit more to the left rail on average. The results seem generally good. Something that immediately stood out to me is that your instinct is to click these, but it only clicks to an image. On mobile, it's not a very good experience at all, because you're seeing these images take up a lot of your vertical space and not getting the ability to click out. That's something they definitely can and probably will fix, but it'll be interesting to see on average. So if I'm a user, the load time on that might kind of like vary how I feel about it. I'm generally feeling not a lot of depth. I'm probably clicking through to learn more from other articles. You definitely have to go off site. It's interesting because if you look at their actual quick answer setup, this is essentially what they're doing up here. I'm not sure what this is adding that this did not do better. And this is a common occurrence with SGE, is Google has put a lot of thought to these SERP features that they've spent years upon years iterating on and building by query type to think about the optimal setup for that specific search. And what you'll notice, at least in my opinion, on average, is a lot of these are essentially just quick answers again. And many of the SERP features are actually more elegant solutions for displaying the optimal way to think about that same solution, which in this case is exactly what I just said. You can actually go see the site. They are trying to drive you to do one more search. That's reasonable, at least. But you're going to get to the brand website at least, and you immediately get comparison information that you can dig into further about that specific brand that stands out. While here, you're not getting any of that information. You can't dive in. It's essentially a subpar version of this set and query set they have below. So that's not super great, in my opinion. Another software type term for the SEO's viewing would be a comparison search, because you're comparing one software tool to the next and you're trying to get a feel for which one is superior overall. Um, it's just interesting, even doing this query twice, I'm now seeing different information. I think that in itself is perplexing a little bit. So I ran this once yesterday, and essentially it told me Ahrefs provided more in-depth backlink data. That's not new, but what I did get last time that I thought was conflicting is they actually go back and say Semrush has the best backlink data. It's kind of a conflicting voice. I don't know if we'll see different data the second time. It looks like it is not different. It's possible because it was mobile. I've heard they are caching this to help with that load time generally, but it's kind of a interesting kind of framing in general. And of course, it's offering a strong opinion here. SEMrush is a more complete and comprehensive platform. Ahrefs offers fewer tools at higher price points. That's a point of opinion. I'm personally a Ahrefs fanboy. I like SEMrush. Don't get me wrong. Ahrefs is increasingly getting higher in price every day, so that's not an inaccurate measure. But as you can see, again, essentially a kind of beefed up quick answer essentially, and we're getting that same thing right below. It's like, why are we redoing this here? I guess the difference is you're summarizing the insights from 3 sites, potentially more, rather than one. And something that I heard get called out, I believe, by Mike King, which is good observation, and we'll see if we see it here, is you tend to see multiple results for the same query type. So that's interesting. On average, that you essentially can get multiple SERP areas and drive more clicks. So that might be bullish for people that are concerned that this might take away clicks on average. And just seeing this, even without the quick answer, I don't think this is going to be that negative to click volume on complex software queries. Essentially, what Google is doing now is, unlike ChatGPT that will give super comprehensive answers, it's essentially like a little bit longer version of a quick answer. So if you essentially have a query type where a little bit longer version of a quick answer is not sufficient, that's probably going to drive clicks. So the same kind of constructs that drive clicks on average on other SERPs will probably inform your strategy here. So like in this example, I don't think this is nearly detailed enough for me to not want to click one of these results if I'm truly comparing these tools and ready to buy. So that's something to consider. And also just keep an eye on the fact that Google is changing its answer, or the generative AI is. Maybe it's doing it on the fly. SEMrush is better today than it was yesterday. That's all possible. But I'm not quite sure there. So jumping over to, actually, let's do one more SaaS query, Salesforce alternatives. In this case, you can tell the query type changed colors. It's doing the same kind of setup as that roundup. Some of these terms or brands are not getting their thumbnail pulled. That's going to be something interesting we're going to have to keep an eye on and think about as SEOs. Most likely is we definitely want to get our logo pulled. It's interesting how bad most of them look. You'd think the favicon of that brand would be the most relevant thing to put in this area, but it's not what's happening currently anyways. And similar, it's kind of straightforward, looks pretty off the cuff. But again, you want to click these, and all you're getting is an image link. Not a great result currently, and they're set up below. It seems superior in terms of getting you to the right information. So I'm not sure why you'd really want to use that in the first place. Jumping to e-commerce, doing best air conditioners as a search. Take notice of how long this one takes. Actually, that was not too bad. Why don't we mix it up just in case that is a cache experience, because I've searched it before. I think that is the case. So now you can feel it's taking longer because I have not done the search already on my desktop. And that's a first impression of these e-commerce searches, is they tend to just take a long time on average. So if we do window air conditioner, we can just feel that one more time just to get a sense for how long it's taking. If I'm a user, I'm scrolling down. It's these shopping results are piping in that that shopping information, especially on mobile. This is going to have that cumulative layout shift, which is not ideal. It's kind of ironic that Google is saying, hey, you should not have cumulative layout shift, which essentially means how much does your page shift uh, into the experience. And this very significantly does, very obviously. So here we see very clear options. Native for affiliate sites, when they're featuring the products, they decide not to use thumbnails on e-commerce because they want your eye drawn to this for the most part. And they're probably not feeling that bad about pushing from affiliate sites because on average, they're still getting to the first party. So it's kind of just redistributing where the traffic is going. So I have a feeling that's why they are not as like neutral about this. It's not great for affiliates on average. And they seem to be nudging further to like the review experience in this case, where people are going to want to push to as us as SEOs. I see a world where we now, assuming this goes live, there's going to be more effort like there is on local to get reviews. So now there's going to be review interest on e-commerce for national brands in a more sizable way, at least than previously, because you want to make sure your products are getting properly highlighted for SEO. So that's a potential sea change for e-commerce. And if we dive down, that's just kind of the main note, is just how long that takes. On desktop, on mobile, they will only show one result and then essentially ask you to expand further. But here it is taking a lot of traffic from those affiliate websites. And the kind of like two-sided coin is there's a good chance you just scroll the way the experience is currently. This is decent information in terms of digging in. Again, this is a complex product, so I'm not sure I'm satisfied by what this information is telling me as compared to a really in-depth review like a Wirecutter and things like that do a good job. It's interesting. We see Bob Villa actually gets two results here. We do see the Wirecutter who's getting their information featured. Not necessarily bullish, but overall something to think about. Here we can test essentially the follow-up response. When we do a query of this type, we get this search experience where it essentially prompts you with what they think might be a follow-up question. And again, it gives us that brand name experience, but not ability to dive in further, which in my opinion is not a good experience. So it's like, what are we accomplishing with this when we could have pushed to at least a result where we would have gotten this information as a next click, or at least shorten this, the feature snippet height, and like have a click out effect. It wouldn't be terrible if they did this and then had these three that are right. But one of the things I'm neutral on is that this mixed view and without sense of what's coming from where, you're kind of like guessing what to click to get the best result in terms of information. So normally you default to that first result. Now we're defaulting to three. We don't have a clear sense. There'll be more to learn. Potentially, I could see the fact, and I haven't tested this yet, that maybe the leftmost is what's getting leveraged the most in this kind of feature set. It's hard to say as of now, but it's just something to keep an eye on in this space. So if we go middle funnel, kind of visual, let's do mattress size chart. Here we see the previous results with those charts of just the different visuals present. Here they're actually featuring multiple, it's essentially refeaturing those images, and we see the images and they do give you the ability to go to the website. It's not just an image in this case. So that's kind of interesting and a little bit better result than you normally would see. This is not a chart, but it's not a terrible result on average. You can see, again, your eyes are drawn to these thumbnails in this case, and also here. So I don't think there's anything, it's not terrible. Users are probably going to these results. There's nothing alarming here if I'm a user on average, and I can dig in further. But again, what are we accomplishing with this? It's supposed to be new, novel. This is relatively useful. I can see that argument, but I would gather that if you click something like this, this is actually the most useful thing to see. So we're essentially prefacing with a less optimal result than what we had previously. That again, Google has done an amazing job over time, really figuring out the optimal SERP feature set that rounding up in the exact same way is going to continuously give you that B minus experience of. And they're essentially pushing down these feature sets that are on average really rigorously achieved for a B minus result. And that to me is probably why they have de-emphasized that SERP feature in terms of the quick answer over time, because they realize maybe not always is that actually the most optimal result. So I think that's the most interesting kind of dichotomy, is they are at once saying, because of the, I would guess, the pressure of the outside world, we should do featured snippets, but at the same time, have in their back pot or in recent history essentially gone away from that. So it's a contradiction, and I think it shows that they're not all might meet the eye here in terms of the quality of some of these results. Moving to one more e-commerce query, we can go more inspirational, flooring ideas. Here, you're probably wanting visual results. You can see that present in the commerce searches. And down here, it's taking a while to load. Again, you can see some images. And this is, I think, another example of why this is just non-optimal. Is Google, at least in version 1, has defaulted to a generally similar feature set in terms of what this can accomplish. That doesn't mean they can't iterate on it. It's in beta, but they're showing visuals of vinyl and bamboo, but because of this query type, it demands bigger images on average to actually get that inspiration. So here we actually see all that in a way that actually does nothing for me. I get no context of this flooring idea, which essentially makes all of these images not that useful. This is a value reducing SERP feature compared to just getting right to the result today, because they've been thoughtful. They pump up the image sizes because it actually gives me a sense, hey, I would like this kind of image. And because of that, dig in. Knowing the name in this case, not actually what you care to know at first glance as a user. What you want is rather the aesthetic and then get the name after. And they got that perfect with this SERP feature. Again, it's a boilerplate experience currently. And because of that, you might feel like it's okay in some results, but it's truly a lot of the time B minus, if not B minus is probably the fair assumption compared to the very rigorous feature set they've kind of like dug over and built over time. So moving on to the finance space, something Google said here is that essentially they would not show these results at first. So what is interesting is they are in a lot of cases, sometimes they're not. And their way of solving for that is this kind of boilerplate at the bottom. They're saying, don't take this at first, don't take this advice out of the gate, talk to a professional. And that's interesting. I've seen this present at the top for some health queries. It's not always being shown, but it's interesting that we're actually seeing this. And again, it's a very similar result. It's essentially a quick answer with more thumbnails at the top. I don't think there's any difference than a typical quick answer in terms of how this drives click-through rate or don't. Something that's interesting and worth noting at this point, I don't see generative AI actually being put below paid a lot of the time. Here, we're not seeing paid. And I've heard it noted by Mike King on Twitter that essentially they have had results where ads were above this. So I would expect that to come, but I think it is interesting that they defaulted to this layout in beta. That could potentially be bullish for SEOs, that we do get a result above paid if this goes live and is good. So essentially, it's just another featured snippet. It's a little more colorful. It looks nice. That's a positive, I would say. So I don't have anything against this kind of result, which is essentially what we had previously. The quick answer, now it's a little prettier looking. And I don't think it's going to be that prohibitive to any of the click-through rate we got previously, especially on more complex terms where we want to learn more about that thing, which we probably do on what is an IRA. Moving on to an interesting query that is used by a lot of SEOs. Interestingly, I don't remember if we had to generate this one. Sometimes you do have to generate. I think when this is happening, they know this might not be the best kind of query type on average to show generative results. And we'll see why that's the case in a second, potentially, unless this has changed from the last time I ran it. You can see also taking a little bit of time. And here are their listing statistics. And this is where it just gets like very meh. This can evolve, and it probably should evolve. They're sourcing statistics, and we have no idea where these are coming from. So we get a sense that they're at least listed on these right rails. But for people who are kind of like going to fill this out, reference their websites, this is not doing much if you actually want to build a credible article. If you're just going to cite a stat without actually knowing where it came from, that's not the best. And as Drew Page on our team nicely referenced, essentially a lot of these who knows if some of these are being hallucinated or inaccurate. Kind of hard to say on average, but overall, the fact that they're not referencing the third party that actually came up with that information, when you need that in this case to have it be useful most of the time, not a good result. So this is, again, another query type that is probably not the best on average because of that. Moving to another complex query type, mortgage calculator. You can see they have this very, again, thoughtful, clearly thought through user experience below to actually calculate your mortgage payment. That's important. And what they've done instead, at least short term, again, they have that financial advice query here, is they have the quick answer above the fold, and they push down that other part of the result. So not the best. And as you can see, this is adding nothing, in my opinion. It's essentially not the query experience at all, should not be there at all, and potentially could get removed at some point. Would be relatively easy for them to say, not easy, I'm not technical, but anything with calculator in it, do not show generative AI until they're so powerful that they could generate a calculator, which apparently some of these might be feasible of doing. But for now, it's just a bad, not great user experience. So that's not great overall. I've seen a lot of other examples that essentially to me are just not doing much. So this is true to our heart here at Siege Media, where we do content strategy. And what I thought about this query type that was interesting is essentially not one of these are an example of a content strategy. These are examples of content marketing, types of content you can create. It's not a strategy. It's not your thoughtfulness behind why you choose these things. It's essentially giving us an incorrect answer on average. And I think that kind of like brings us to the recap here. Hopefully this is another kind of a good initial glance at some of the query types that you might experience as an SEO. My impression is that it's fitting into a box currently, likely because of the pressure from investors and GPT-4 and OpenAI, that they have to do this. But what I think is missed is on a lot of these simplified query types, their human plus machine experience, which I'm sure is AI based in a lot of ways, is superior to what this experience will be. It's essentially, it seems like the same thing, just kind of vanillized, and it's not deeply considering all of these query types like it should. And because of that, giving us on average a B- experience. And because of that, it just doesn't seem like the best direction on average to me. This one's fine. The images are cool in this case. But what I feel as a user is that it's not actually value additive. And if it's really on the fence a lot of time, and on mobile, it's pushing a lot of stuff down. We're not looking at that today just because of the setup we have. It's arguable why they're doing this at all. And in terms of how it might impact click-through rate and organic results and all of that, I don't know. I mean, I think they do need to really speed things up. I think that's a critical part of this. Whether or not that's feasible is uncertain. On those e-commerce queries, it's like brutally bad on most of these search results, and you can really feel this when you're doing these searches with consistency. It's just how long this is taking. And Google cares so much about this in every other experience that they don't in this case. Is just quite interesting to me. But I'm sure they see opportunities to like have an ad block here and things like that that will generate more value for them over time. Potentially, we will see. But my instinct is like, this is not actually better. And that was the goal of this experience. I think it has value as a query set for super long tail. In my opinion, a better result would be, why don't they have a chat with Bard tab up top where we can go do complex queries about some of the more random things in our lives and get those answers with some clarity. And that's what it almost is. I think it almost reflects our own internal standard here, is that this might have some value for the super long tail where the query sets were not the best and they're essentially improving that. In those cases, that super long tail, you wouldn't want to have a human most of the time write an in-depth good article. And that's where it gets more commoditized and not worth the value. But when you're on the short tail, the human experience is always going to be a better one because of that true experience in the overall equation. And on the long form, you're not going to be able to get to that depth. So having results like this will be more beneficial on average. So it's essentially almost having a sliding scale of when this deploys seems like the more useful feature set for it. But when it's like popping up on Mortgage Calculator, you're essentially building a less optimal experience in the search result on average for a lot of these. Again, this is my opinion. I'm an SEO. I'm sure there's some bias in these words, but that's just my overall instinct of V1. Of course, this is going to get a lot better. If it does roll out, I mean, my honest take is like, I'm not sure this should roll out in its current form. I could see it not rolling out at all, actually. That would be its own like negative press for them. So, but Google has a history of doing these kind of beta things and then it never becoming anything. So I could see that here. It's very, very feasible. But if it does, sort of similar take. I think it depends on your industry, your query type. I think 10 to 20% hit is reasonable. There's some opportunities here. I think the features of like really trying to rank for some of these things and get multiple results and stand out, like might even like benefit brands even more than it used to and get you multiple results. And that might drive additional clicks and all those things. And we'll definitely want to like get into multiple kind of articles more than we ever did. You should have already done this, but increasingly it's going to get more important to make sure you get listed here. But the like net effect was like, do we stop doing SEO because this result shows here? No, it's just a little different version of SEO because we still want to influence our brands getting shown here on average. So that's going to be the same things, in my opinion, to kind of help nudge that up with some minor tweaks. And I could see you can see just natural things like a focus area on a thumbnail that's in the center, or your hero image that's in the center. My Zapier image here, you dig this in, this is where my eye is drawn, is that my focal point is in the center of the image, and it's easy when essentially drawn down. So that's just something that stands out, and maybe is like more of a brand point, is that you want the focal point in the middle of the image that would look good at good resolution. So potential action item. Interesting times. If the world of Google and search is going to change at all, this is it. I'm not sure, given what I see in the first version, but would love to hear what everyone's thoughts are. And if you made this far, thanks for listening.